When I was 23, I married a man who was almost twice my age. And believe me, this wasn't a story about love, not about that fate painted in romantic books. I did it for the money, for that luxurious life, for the chance to escape the dreary, constrained routine I'd been wallowing in all those years. I grew up in a small French town near Marseille. That place always reminded me of a prison. Identical little streets, identical gossip, identical hopes. Everyone there followed the same script: school, job, wedding, home loan, vacation once a year, and on like that until old age. No one dared dream of anything bigger. Even when my classmates chattered about the future, their ambitions were limited to a cozy little house with a garden and a trip to Spain every 3 years. My family was typical. Mom taught at the local school, Dad worked on construction sites. We had a modest house, an old Peugeot, constant trips to Carrefour and Leclerc, strict saving on everything. Dinner almost always consisted of the same thing: potatoes, chicken, vegetables. No restaurants, no overseas delicacies. Mom constantly preached, the main thing is to live within your means, don't spend more than you earn. But it drove me crazy. As a teenager, I thought, why should I put up with scraps? Why can others have better and I never can? I lived in envy of images. I flipped through glossy magazines with luxurious villas, series about women in Paris and Berlin, where they roamed boutiques, sipped wine on balconies, jetted around the world. I turned the pages and pondered, am I any worse? When I got into university in Paris, the contrast became even sharper. Girls from my group showed up to lectures in Chanel coats and Louboutin shoes. On weekends, they flew to Rome or Madrid just to unwind and refresh their wardrobe. They argued about which hotel was cooler in Cannes, while I sat calculating how to stretch my paycheck from the small cafe where I worked part-time as a waitress until the end of the month. My reality was a tiny room in a dorm with worn walls and roommates who constantly threw noisy parties. My lunch, a baguette from the bakery and cheap espresso. I tried not to show that I was envious, but inside everything boiled. They were enjoying the life I only dreamed of. The turning point happened completely unexpectedly. A friend convinced me to go to a party at a bar on Montmartre. I resisted. It seemed like I'd be a fish out of water there. I didn't have a proper dress or striking makeup. In the end, I put on my only black dress from a sale and went. And that's where I met him. His name was Martin. He was 39, tall, well-groomed in an impeccably tailored suit. But what hooked me most was his manner. Unlike the other guys in the bar who shouted over each other, bragged about cars, or sprinkled banal compliments, he was calm, confident in himself without extra chatter. He approached me and asked, "Are you a student?" I nodded, trying to hide my awkwardness. "Bold," he said, "Paris doesn't forgive poverty." That phrase strung right in the soul, because I knew he was absolutely right. We talked for several hours. He shared stories about his work at a financial firm, trips to Berlin and Geneva, his apartment in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. For me, it was like a portal to another world. He spoke evenly without boasting, but I realized, before me was a man who had everything I'd ever dreamed of. When he handed me his business card at the end of the evening, I twirled it in my hands for a long time. It seemed like a pass to the life I'd fantasized about, but I hesitated. Should I write or not? A couple of days later, I still sent a short message. "Thanks for the evening." That's how it all spun up. First date, a restaurant where one dinner cost more than my monthly stipend. He gave me a Hermes scarf. Then a weekend in Rome. Then Venice. For the first time, I stayed in hotels where beds weren't just made with white sheets, but turned into clouds of fluffy pillows and rustling fabrics. For the first time, I saw menus where dish prices equaled my monthly rent. For the first time, I felt what it means not to look at price tags. I felt like Cinderella. Only Cinderella always knew the fairy tale would end, but I decided this was now my everyday life. A year later, he proposed marriage. I was 23. He was almost 40. He gave me a ring with a diamond that sparkled so dazzlingly I couldn't tear my gaze away, and said, "With me, you'll never have to worry about money." I agreed. The wedding was like from a Hollywood movie. A grandiose hall in a hotel, champagne, ladies in designer outfits, men in tuxedos. I walked down the carpeted aisle in a white dress worth several €1,000s, and everyone around gazed at me with admiration. Mom cried, friends whispered, "Laura, you won the lottery," and I smiled and thought, this is it, I won. Back then, I didn't suspect that in reality, I'd just suffered a defeat. I didn't marry a person, I married an image, a mirage, and that mirage turned out to be far more dangerous than I could imagine. At first, everything resembled a magical dream. I lived in an apartment in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, with huge windows, light curtains, and a view of neat boulevards. In the morning, I woke up and went to the kitchen, where the granite countertop shone as if it had just been cleaned. The fridge always had exquisite cheeses, wines, fresh raspberries year-round. I was adapting to the new world. Shopping on Avenue Montaigne, lunches in Michelin-starred restaurants, getaways on weekends to Italy or Austria. Friends from the past couldn't believe their eyes looking at my photos. I got tons of messages. "You're living like in a fairy tale," and I believed it myself. But soon, I started noticing what had previously escaped my eyes. First, loneliness. Martin was almost always absorbed in business. His phone rang non-stop. He left for the office at 7 in the morning and returned deep into the night. Even at home, he wasn't with me but with the computer and stacks of papers. I sat in the spacious apartment and caught myself thinking that I didn't know what to do with myself. Before, I had studies, part-time jobs, friends, and now, I had an ocean of time and complete lack of freedom. Yes, I could pop into a boutique, order food delivery, head to a spa salon, but that didn't replace normal communication. I tried to meet with friends, but gradually our paths diverged. They led ordinary student lives with exams, parties, worries about rent, and I was the wife of a mature, wealthy man. It irritated them, and me too. Second, his control. When we first started dating, it seemed touching that he cared about me. "You don't need to work, I'll take care of everything," he said. "You shouldn't worry about finances, just enjoy." I agreed because it sounded like a dream come true. But soon I realized this wasn't care, this was power. If I bought something too budget-friendly, he might notice. "Why do you need this cheap cosmetics? I can buy you premium class." If I wanted to meet a friend at a simple cafe, he said, "Such places aren't for you, that's too vulgar." He decided where we'd go, what we'd order, even what I'd wear, and it was all presented as he knows better. At first I thought it was his manner, a habit of commanding, but then I understood it was a whole system. I was gradually dissolving into him. Third, his circle. We often attended dinners and receptions where his buddies gathered. Bankers, investors, firm owners, their wives, ladies older than me, well-groomed with jewels. I sat with them at the table and felt like a schoolgirl. They discussed home interiors, elite schools for children, upscale resorts. I was silent. I had no children, no experience, no topics for conversation. Once, one of the women, glancing at my ring, said, "You're quite young with us, lucky you. Just remember over time this stops being fun." Back then I didn't grasp her words, but they stuck in my head. I convinced myself that everything was fine, that loneliness was temporary, that control was a sign of care, that awkwardness in his friend's company was just due to the age difference. But inside, anxiety was growing. One night I woke up, looked at the sleeping Martin and thought for the first time, what if I made a mistake? That thought scared me. I chased it away, repeated to myself, you wanted this yourself, you chose it, you have everything you dreamed of, don't you dare whine. But the further it went, the harder it was to deceive myself. And here's a moment that etched itself into my memory especially vividly. We were flying for the weekend to Geneva, in business class with champagne and obliging flight attendants. I gazed out the porthole and suddenly caught myself feeling emptiness. I thought, and yet when I worked in the cafe and could only afford espresso for €1, I was happier. I had goals, jokes with colleagues, plans, and now I have everything in the world and I feel nothing. That emptiness became my constant companion. From the outside, my life seemed impeccable. Photos from Rome, branded things, dinners in elite establishments. But inside I was cracking like fragile porcelain. I didn't realize yet that this was only the beginning. I was still dwelling in that ideal picture, but the cracks were becoming more noticeable. And the most frightening, they came not only from the relationship but from myself. One morning, I woke up and realized that I couldn't remember the last time I laughed until tears. You know, that sincere laughter that comes from the depths of the soul, from pure joy. I hadn't had that for months. My life was scheduled minute by minute. Breakfast, fitness club, shopping, rare meetings with friends that were increasingly reduced to superficial visits. I didn't work, didn't study. There was money, but I had no pursuit of my own. I felt devastated. Martin lived in his own rhythm. He had contracts, negotiations, calls, business trips. Sometimes we dined together, but more often he was glued to his phone, replying to emails. I tried to share how melancholic or lonely I felt, but he just smiled and said, "You have everything others only dream of. Just relax and live for pleasure." It was like a deaf wall. Any feeling of mine reflected and came back to me like a boomerang. The hardest was his attitude toward my desires. For example, I said, "I think maybe I should go back to studying. I didn't complete my master's after all." And he replied, "Why, it's a useless waste of time. I can hire teachers for you if you want to learn something, but you don't need a diploma." Or I said, "I want to find a job, even part-time." He immediately, "That's absurd. You don't need to work. People work who can't afford independence." Independence, that word sounded like mockery, because in reality I felt anything but independent. I felt it especially sharply when we went to a party at his colleagues'. There were plenty of young people there about my age. They guffawed, discussed movies, travel plans, shared work anecdotes. I stood nearby, listened, and realized I couldn't even insert a word. I didn't know what movies were trending now because Martin considered it nonsense. I couldn't talk about work because I didn't have one. I couldn't even say, and with my friends it was like this, because I no longer had friends left. I felt like an outcast, as if I was stuck in a world I no longer belonged to. And then came a thought, even scarier than the previous one. If Martin suddenly decides to break up, what will I have left? I didn't complete my education. No job, no own money, no connections. I was completely dependent on him. That thought gnawed into my brain and wouldn't let go. Everything escalated when we had our first serious spat. I wanted to visit my parents for a couple of weeks, just to relax, be in familiar places, but Martin said, "That's pointless. Your parents are in a tiny town, there's nothing to do there. Better we fly to Cannes, I just wanted to meet a partner there." I insisted, I said, "I want to go alone." And that's when I saw his true face for the first time. He looked at me coldly and said, "You're forgetting who gave you all this. Who would you be without me?" Those words hit harder than any quarrel, because I understood he sincerely believes that my life is his merit, that without him I'm nothing. I still went to my parents, but even there I felt like an outsider. My mom was glad about my wonderful life. Friends looked with envy. No one understood my feelings. And I was silent. I smiled so no one would suspect. But when I returned to Paris, I had changed. I started noticing details I'd missed before. His detachment, his condescending remarks, his dominance. I tried to discuss it with him, but he cut me off every time. "You chose it all yourself." And that was true, I chose it myself. But it seems I chose not life but a prison with gilded walls. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to admit even to myself, maybe I made a colossal mistake. But that thought sounded louder and louder. One evening in April, everything became finally unbearable. We returned from another weekend in Monaco. Palms, yachts, sun, exquisite restaurants, everything around shone with festive brilliance, and inside me there was emptiness. For the first time in years I felt real anxiety, almost panic. Martin was busy, calls, messages, planning deals. I sat on the balcony of our apartment in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, watched the rain streaming down the windows and realized this isn't life. This is deception. That evening I allowed myself to sob for the first time. Not quietly, not stealthily, but so that tears flowed in streams and my heart squeezed from despair. I recalled my parents, friends, myself at 20 who dreamed of freedom and adventures, and understood I have no freedom, I have nothing authentic. The following weeks became the heaviest. I tried to talk to Martin, at first carefully. "I feel like I've lost myself." He looked down from above. "You have everything you could dream of. Why do you need anything else?" "I'm not talking about things," I replied. "I'm talking about myself." He just nodded and returned to the computer. I understood he doesn't delve in, and maybe he never will. Then I decided to take the initiative into my own hands. I started searching for myself anew. First, with small steps, I signed up for courses, photography courses. I always adored shooting, but after the wedding I abandoned it. I started strolling around the city, trying to see the world through my own eyes, not Martin's. Then I tried to resume communication with friends, not those who envy my position, but those who were once close. But it turned out many doors were already slammed shut. People's lives had diverged from mine. And then I realized one more thing: real life can't be bought with money. The climactic moment happened when I got an invitation to dinner from Martin's family. In the huge dining room with crystal chandeliers, among paintings worth more than my former apartment, I suddenly felt shame. Shame that my life was a complete facade. I looked at people chattering about business, luxurious voyages, yachts, art collections, and understood I had sneaked into a world that was never mine. And that's when I thought seriously for the first time, what if I leave? That thought scared me more than anything. Leaving meant losing money, status, luxury, but staying meant losing myself. I started planning, first quietly without noise. I made notes, collected papers, studied paths to financial autonomy. I understood that the return back would be thorny, but sticking in the golden cage was impossible. And then I grasped the main truth I'd ignored before. A luxurious life isn't enough. Real life is freedom, the ability to be yourself and make decisions. That decision came with difficulty. I started going to a psychologist more often, consulting with financiers, searching for ways to gain independence, and in parallel, building an inner fortress. To break the marriage, I needed not only strength but strategy. I realized one more thing: wealth and position don't save from loneliness, domination, and pressure. They only hide problems that sooner or later surface. And there, standing on the balcony on a rainy Parisian evening, I felt relief for the first time. Not full freedom, but the possibility of choice, the possibility to tell myself, I can live differently. That was the first serious crack in the mirage, but it also became the first step toward authentic life. Spring had almost taken hold in Paris. Birds chirped, sun rays pierced through the high windows of the apartment, but inside me darkness still reigned. Martin was absorbed in affairs as always. His attention was fully captured by work, calls, and social events, and I sat on the couch, holding a camera in my hands and pondered my fate. That day, everything flipped. I accidentally ran into an old friend from university, Eliza. She was strolling through the Luxembourg gardens with her husband and child. They looked content with their own troubles, their own joys, and at that moment I realized I envied them. Not the money, not the status, but the simple, real life. Eliza asked, "How are you? Everything okay?" And I couldn't lie. I said, "Honestly, I'm not sure." The words flew off my tongue, and for the first time in many months I felt relief. On the way home I realized, if I don't change something right now, my life will turn into an eternal dream, beautiful, sparkling, but soulless. I started preparing my departure. It was all not easy: apartment, financial ties, fear of judgment and misunderstanding from others. But the main thing, fear of the unknown. And here's the culmination. Martin returned late, imbued with the aroma of expensive perfume and the aura of success. I sat across from him, my heart pounding like a drum. "Martin," I said quietly, "I'm leaving." He didn't believe it at first. Then he froze, then tried to joke it off. "This is a prank, right?" "No, I want to live my own life, free, real." I saw in his eyes a mix of surprise and annoyance. He tried to persuade me to stay, harped on money, luxury, position. But I had heard those arguments 1,000 times. I understood, this isn't life. This is a mirage. The first days after the breakup were tough. I rented a modest apartment, got a job, regained the sense of self-reliance. Sometimes it seemed like I'd lost too much: comfort, stability, radiance. But gradually I started living for real. I laughed, met new people, traveled again, but now not for photos on social media but for myself. I learned to appreciate the little things again: morning coffee, the rustle of rain outside the window, friends' guffaws. I felt that life isn't what you acquire with money. It's what you experience, feel, live through. A year later I met someone new. Not rich, not influential, but just a person with whom I could chat, laugh, be myself. And for the first time in many years I understood, happiness isn't in luxury. Happiness is in the freedom to be yourself. Yes, I lost the ideal life with exquisite dinners, yachts, and expensive outfits, but I gained a real feeling that you can't buy for any means. And now I reflect on that choice. Leaving the golden cage was the heaviest, most frightening but truest decision in my life. And you know the most striking thing, I never regretted it,